And now to shocking video showing a cold-blooded attack against a convenience store clerk.
A robber opens fire without warning, shooting the clerk point blank in the face.
We frequently find ourselves peeking into the darkest corners of human conduct in the strange realm of true crime. Consider getting the chance to witness the terrifying moments just before an unimaginable thing occurs. From nefarious schemes to twisted motives, here are 12 crimes that were caught on camera shortly before people were murdered. Number 1. A violent robbery. A brazen thief is currently the subject of a police manhunt after a chilling incident at a gas station in Memorial, Houston. Surveillance footage captures the shocking moment when the robber, without uttering a word or making any kind of demands, enters the Chevron station and callously shoots the clerk in the face. The victim, a store employee, was subjected to a point-blank shooting by the intruder, leaving bystanders and viewers of the footage in disbelief. Despite the sudden and horrific nature of the attack, however, the attacker's violent spree does not end there. Ignoring any possible conscience, he vaulted over the store counter, subjecting the employee to a series of merciless blows. It was evident that his intention extended well beyond mere violence, as he repeatedly attempted to access the cash register, hoping to make a quick escape with ill-gotten gains. In a fortunate turn of events, he was thwarted in his attempts to abscond with any money, and despite the harrowing nature of his crime, the suspect remains at large. The police have provided a description of the assailant indicating that he is estimated to be between 25 and 35 years old, with a weight that ranges from 230 to 280 pounds. The search for this dangerous individual continues on as law enforcement works tirelessly to bring him to justice. Number 2. Stabbing police. Body cam footage provides this disturbing peek into a fateful encounter in New York, documenting a moment that a 21-year-old man, off of his psychiatric medication and high on illegal drugs, charged at 2 police officers holding a kitchen knife, ultimately leading to them fatally shooting him. The terrifying episode occurs when a worried relative contacts the New York Police Department to report a disturbance that involves the young guy who had been making threats towards a family member within the limits of the Roosevelt Landing apartment complex. Officers arrived at the scene, and they were wearing body cameras at the time, capturing the events that would unfold. These tapes were made public as part of a normal inquiry launched in the aftermath of the man's terrible demise, and as the police reached the building's lobby, they devised a strategy. One would go to the apartment in issue, while another would remain behind to protect the entry and await backup. The 3 police officers entered the elevator to begin their assignment, one of them carrying a protection shield. Meanwhile, 3 more would remain in the corridor, with a citizen in plain clothing helping them to prop the door open. Suddenly, the unnamed suspect exits from a separate elevator, dashing down the corridor towards an officer with his back turned, clutching a knife in a menacing way. Panic erupts as the cops in the lobby take safety behind the door, while the suspect immediately shifts his attention to the elevator, clutching the frightening weapon. One of the officers instantly grabs her taser and aims it at the man's chest, but he was unconvinced. As the suspect approaches, the officer resorts to pushing and kicking him. Other officers who were stationed on each side quickly pull their weapons and open fire. The gunshots that hit his chest drove the suspect backwards out of the elevator. He then lifts his right arm on the ground, still gripping the knife, before it sinks lifelessly upon his chest. Number 3. Kaneka Jenkins. Surveillance footage published sheds light on the events that led up to Kaneka Jenkins' sad discovery in a hotel walk-in freezer. The footage shows Jenkins wandering through the hotel's corridors and kitchen, raising doubts about the circumstance of her demise. She can be seen in the footage leaving the elevator alone around 3:20 a.m., apparently fighting to keep her balance as she navigates the corridors. Her appearance at the hotel would be linked to a gathering with friends on the 9th floor. She, however, was not formally reported missing until 1 p.m. the next day. Her lifeless corpse would be discovered inside the freezer. While the security video does not indicate when she entered the freezer, officials would suspect that she did so shortly after going out of frame. The post-mortem results revealed by the Cook County Medical Examiner indicate accidental hypothermia as the cause of her demise, putting to rest any kind of conspiracy theory. She had no severe injuries, according to medical examiner's findings, other than a tiny scratch on her right ankle and a bruise on her right thigh. However, the teen's family attorney, Larry Rogers, would state that he had intended to conduct his own investigation and, if necessary, obtain a second autopsy. He expressed worry about the hotel's handling of the matter, claiming that they had failed to take sufficient precautions while a bewildered 19-year-old was in their freezer. He emphatically stated that there had to be an answer for how it all happened. Better still, there had to be an explanation for what occurred. Teresa Martin, Kaneka's bereaved mother, shared these thoughts, claiming that both the police department and the hotel had a role in her daughter's unfortunate demise. Martin had expressed her concerns about her daughter's well-being in a 911 call that was made after she went missing, but before her corpse had been discovered, adding that she assumed that she had been drinking based on her talks with friends. The circumstances that surround her demise continue to be a source of concern for both the police and the hotel. Number 4. Gun Snatcher. An off-duty female police officer in Chicago had to use her pistol to protect herself from Levon Smith, a 39-year-old suspect who had attempted to attack her and grab her handgun. Smith had passed away 3 days later from his injuries after being shot 3 times in the stomach, and the officer interfered to break up the confrontation between Smith and 3 other people outside of an apartment complex on the city's infamously dangerous South Side. Following the departure of the other people, the footage shows the officer and Smith engaging in a brief chat. However, when the officer turns her back for a moment, Smith makes an attempt to take her pistol, resulting in a battle that concluded with both of them wrestling to the ground and her shoes falling off. 2 bullets would be fired during the incident, and Smith can be heard exclaiming that he had been shot. As neighbors were summoned to contact 911, the police would again warn him before firing a 3rd shot, and the last shot in reaction to the danger. A verbal altercation ensues before the police officer eventually takes matters into her own hands and dials 911 herself. She identified herself as a police officer, telling the dispatcher that Smith had tried to rob her and take her off-duty pistol. She further stated that she tried to contact her supervisors, but had received no answers. Number 5. Colleen Ritzer. Philip Chisholm's atrocious deeds, committed while he was just 14 years old, had scarred the nation, casting a long and dark shadow over the lives of everyone who was involved. Colleen Ritzer, his victim, was more than simply a math teacher at his high school. She was a source of inspiration for many. She had no idea that her own student would be the one to extinguish her flame. Chisholm had attacked her before taking her life. As Salem Superior Court Judge David Lowy would deliver the sad verdict, the echoes of Chisholm's heinous and senseless actions would resonate around the courtroom. Recognizing Colleen Ritzer's life of a quiet courage, the judge highlighted that the waves of this catastrophe would permanently crash upon everyone affected, causing them to suffer for an indefinite amount of time. The seriousness of Chisholm's actions warranted a firm response from the justice system. What made his entire ordeal even more gut-wrenching was the chilling surveillance footage in which he could be seen dragging her body in a recycling bin down a hallway and then outside of the school. Later in the footage, he would be seen returning to the building with his pants covered in a dark red substance that was only presumed to be blood. Despite Chisholm's defense counsel's attempt to develop a mental illness narrative to explain the incomprehensible, the jury emphatically rejected the allegations, finding him completely responsible for his actions. The court process would result in Chisholm obtaining a life sentence with the chance of release after 25 years, as well as a 40-year term for cruelty and robbery. His mother would cry silently amidst all of the painful courtroom scenario, struggling with the understanding of her son's actions. Overwhelmed by grief and remorse, she would seize the opportunity to express her heartfelt condolences to the family, realizing the irreparable harm that was inflicted by her son's foolish decision. Throughout the trial, Chisholm maintained a stoic demeanor, akin to a poker player masking his emotion. The lack of sorrow or humanity had stunned the courtroom, and many of the observers had sought answers. How could a youngster like this have performed such a horrific deed without flinching? Philip Chisholm's case is a disturbing reminder of the evil that may hide within even the most seemingly innocent of a person. The heinous nature of his actions, along with his lack of remorse, had prompted troubling concerns about the intricacies of the human psyche and the possibility of evil manifesting at any age. Number 6. Ex-boyfriend. A protective father in Sydney, Ohio, defended his family by taking the life of his daughter's ex-boyfriend as the man had attempted to violently enter their home. James Rail, who was 22 years old, had attempted to push his way through the front door of his former girlfriend Allison Decro. The clip, captured on a Ring camera, shows Rail clothed in a baseball cap, blue sweatshirt, gray t-shirt, and shorts, repeatedly ringing the doorbell. As the moments would pass, he stands patiently, tucking his hands behind his back. Allison's father can be heard on the other side of the door asking him to stop, and he tells Rail that he has a gun. The determined ex-boyfriend, though, continues to bang on the door. Rail ultimately slams his shoulder to the door, shattering the deadbolt lock and opening it just a few inches. In reaction, Allison's father fires 3 shots, hitting him in the left shoulder, right shoulder, and back. He recoils and falls backwards along the front sidewalk, slumping around the house's corner near the garage door. Several moments later, a neighbor walks across the front lawn, begging not to be shot, and meanwhile a 911 call in which Allison praises her father can be heard. On the phone, she comforts her father, telling him that there's nothing that he could have done and that he had saved her life. She had split up with Rail a year and a half before the tragic encounter, but the night before, she had contacted him and left a message. Number 7. Elisa Lam. Authorities in Los Angeles are looking into the unfortunate demise of Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old Canadian woman whose corpse was discovered in a water tank on top of a downtown Los Angeles hotel. Lam was a student at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver and had been visiting California alone when she would last be seen at the Cecil Hotel close to Skid Row. The Los Angeles Police Department had classified her disappearance as suspicious, particularly in light of how she had gotten access to the hotel's rooftop. The Cecil Hotel, which was built in the 1920s, was recently rebuilt and features a grim past, having been visited by prominent serial criminals such as Richard Ramirez and Jack Unterweger. According to local authorities, the hotel has a history of persistent criminal activity. Investigators were working hard to discover whether foul play was involved in her demise in order to piece together the facts. The only methods to access the hotel's roof, according to law enforcement officials, are through a barred door and a fire escape. Only personnel have access to the entrance, which has an alarm system that warns the hotel staff of any presence on the roof. Accessing the water tank where her body was discovered is likewise a difficult undertaking that would need great effort on the part of officials. Elisa Lam had maintained communication with friends and family all throughout her stay in California, right up until the day that she had vanished. The LAPD would reveal security footage from the hotel's elevator, which showed her acting oddly, hiding in a corner, and frequently peering past the elevator doors and into the corridor. Most notably, she never checked out of the hotel, and no one saw her with anybody else. When a maintenance worker responded to allegations of a low water pressure, that's when he would discover her body in one of the hotel's 4 huge water tanks. On the night of her disappearance, Bernard Diaz, a long-term tenant at the hotel, had reported hearing a loud disturbance on the level above him. On that same night, he mentioned flooding, and the motives for her vacation to Los Angeles were unknown, and the inquiry into her demise has thus far been unfruitful. Number 8. A fake robber. When a robber thought to be in his 20s entered Ranchito Tequera in southwest Houston one night, a customer took matters into their own hands. The thief, wearing a black ski mask and gloves, had attacked some customers and demanded their money at gunpoint, holding what seemed to be a weapon. Security footage would show a tense moment as the furious thief swings the weapon around the restaurant, compelling patrons to descend to the ground and relinquish their valuables. In an unexpected turn of events, the brave patron, described as Caucasian or Hispanic, had pulled his own pistol and fired numerous shots at the perpetrator in self-defense. The brave patron efficiently eliminated the menace, protecting fellow others from further trauma. After apprehending the perpetrator, the courageous man retrieved the money that was stolen from the clients and painstakingly restored it to its rightful owners. Following the daring deed, both the gunman and other guests, who had also been victims of the crime, would swiftly leave the premises. The alert customer fired 9 shots, one of which hit the robber in the head and knocked him to the ground. As of yet, authorities have not filed any charges against the shooter and are eager to meet with the consumer shown in the video. The robber's name was not revealed, but officials believe the handgun that he flashed inside the restaurant was a plastic BB pistol. The situation would quickly go south, culminating in a fatal conclusion. When paramedics got to the site, they discovered that the suspect had passed away. Witnesses at the restaurant described the sequence of events to police officers, and according to statements, the man had forced his way inside the business, brandished a weapon, and then threateningly demanded money from the customers. The owner of the restaurant, Pedro Lopez, would reveal great shock that he and his colleagues were still dealing with, saying that the entire staff was full of fear and worry. Number 9. Lorraine Cox. Azam Mangori purposely targeted Lorraine Cox, a 32-year-old lady, as she went home one night after a social engagement, eventually luring her to his residence, where a fatal and horrible tragedy would take place. He took the life of Miss Cox and then attempted to dispose of her remains in such a horrible manner, dismembering her body into 7 parts and throwing them into a forested location. This horrible crime resulted in a life sentence with a minimum time of 20 years before he can even be considered for parole. The heinous act's misery stretches well beyond the courtroom. Elise Fallow, a 28-year-old lady, bravely describes her traumatic experience as the victim's girlfriend. She disclosed that the two of them had planned to create a family together before this tragedy at the hands of an unsuccessful asylum seeker. Miss Fallow emphasized the deep impact of losing the love of her life in an emotional victim impact statement that was made before the court, underlining a part of her had been irreversibly shattered. She would highlight the profound despair that had replaced her daily companion since the demise, saying that attempting to put into words the ways that losing her had impacted her life would be impossible. Miss Fallow reflected on the time that Lorraine was gone, but thought to be alive, and she noticed a ray of optimism, but she did, however, highlight the heartbreaking fact that all hope was lost on that day that she was discovered. Her life had been irreversibly transformed, and she described herself as little more than a shadow of her former self. The small pleasures of life, such as exchanging a kiss or a hug, had been ruthlessly taken away from her, and the agony of losing Lorraine had made her incapable of feeling happiness or comfort. She detailed the constant struggle to even keep afloat in a sea of misery. The terrible pain had pushed her to push others away and live in seclusion, struggling to find her inspiration for anything that was worthwhile. Her moving remarks shed light on the sad repercussions of this senseless crime, emphasizing the significant and long-lasting impact that it had on the lives of those who were left behind. Number 10. Sarath Kapoor. A young Indian student passed away in a senseless action of violence while working at a fast food restaurant in Missouri. Sarath Kapoor, a 25-year-old graduate student at the University of Missouri in Kansas City, had sought a master's degree in computer science, was targeted during a robbery at Jay's Fish and Chicken Market. Kapoor had found himself behind the bar on that fateful day, attempting to manage a risky position. His unexpected demise had crushed his family and friends. He would be described as a gifted student, sharing objectives of many others to achieve success and realize his dreams in the land of opportunity. In order to repatriate Kapoor's remains to India, his cousin launched a GoFundMe campaign, which received a massive reaction, earning more than $50,000. Family members would build a vivid picture of Kapoor as a young man who was full of hope, exuding joy, enthusiasm, and athleticism in the advertising description. The chancellor of the university would recognize Kapoor as a brilliant student who had formed significant bonds with both fellow students and staff. The Kansas City Police Department released surveillance video of the alleged shooter's actions, and the footage showed a man entering the eatery, his hands hidden beneath a t-shirt, and it's unclear whether or not he was hiding a weapon beneath the cloth. Before executing the lethal action, he examines his surroundings, leaving Kapoor's loved ones reeling with grief and the senselessness of his demise. Others had sought refuge behind the counter, but he, in a desperate bid to escape, had turned and sprinted in the opposite direction. That's when the man then opened fire, striking him in the back and causing him to tragically fall. In a heartbreaking turn of events, Kapoor's family learned about his demise via an Indian newspaper. They sought confirmation from Indian officials to corroborate the authenticity of the claims, and the Indian Minister for Non-Resident Indian Affairs and Deputy Chief Minister visited his bereaved family in response to their anguish. Officials stated their intentions to accelerate the repatriation of his remains to his home country with the goal of completing the procedure as soon as possible. As the investigation into his terrible occurrence continues, police have taken an unprecedented step of offering a $10,000 reward for any information that leads to the identity and punishment of those who are guilty of the crime. Number 11. Grace Milan. Jesse Kempson, the attacker of Grace Milan, had been exposed as a serial offender who had woven an intricate web of deceit to portray himself as someone that he was not. In December of 2018, he strangled 21-year-old Grace Milan in his studio apartment after they had met on the dating app Tinder. This horrific action followed an earlier incident where he had attacked another British woman just 8 months prior. Recently unveiled court documents laid bare the extent of his fabrications, in which he had used to deceive friends, family, women, and colleagues. Amongst his false claims were that he was a high-ranking manager in an oil company, he had connections to criminal gangs, and was a cancer survivor, even portraying himself as being an orphan. However, Kempson had since been found guilty in court, receiving an additional 11-year sentence to be served concurrently with a 17-year minimum term for taking the life of Grace Milan. Teammates from the amateur softball team that he played for described him as an oddball and a loner. One former teammate would recount his creepy behavior towards women, noting that he constantly sought to be with younger girls while maintaining a reserved demeanor around male peers. Kempson's modus operandi involved luring women to motels or to his studio apartment. His landlord revealed that he seemed to be a pickup artist, suggesting that this was primarily his focus. He had lost his job as a salesman on the very day he began messaging Grace on Tinder. His fraudulent activities extended into creating fake invoices and calling his own phone to claim commissions for fictitious jobs. His behavior would raise concern amongst colleagues who had noted his frequent disappearances and attempts to claim commissions for non-existent work. In a Facebook post weeks before Miss Milan's demise, he had seemed to acknowledge the devastating impact of his lies on his relationships, offering a heartfelt apology for causing harm and disappointment due to his arrogance and selfishness. It revealed a glimpse into his troubled psyche. Number 12. Claudia Banton. Claudia Banton was an ex-convict who was facing charges in the fatal shooting of her friend Delia Johnson. The stunning finding was that Banton was freed by police quickly after an incident because authorities did not recognize the gunman was a woman at the time. Claudia Banton was accused of taking the life of Johnson and was captured in Florida and then extradited to New York after serving a 7-year sentence in Georgia for forgery and other criminal convictions in both Georgia and New Jersey. Prosecutors revealed that Banton was hauled up by police shortly following the execution-style shooting. She was freed, however, since the cops mistakenly assumed the gunman was male. The tragic shooting was caught on video, with the culprit subsequently identified as Banton, approaching Delia Johnson and shooting numerous times into the back of her head. The horrifying video shows the gunman quietly strolling away from the scene while Johnson lay motionless on the ground. Her mother characterized the perpetrator as a family friend. She said that her daughter had been persuaded to her demise by a phone conversation from the 42-year-old Banton, and she addressed the shooter with anguish, adding that she was in so much pain that she was numb and was doing her best to keep herself up. The footage shows Johnson fainting in front of terrified onlookers as the attacker calmly makes her way to a parked white car, climbing into the driver's seat and driving away. One of Johnson's younger sisters would say that the suspect was a family friend who had attempted functions, celebrations, and holidays. However, she also remarked that the two's friendship had grown stormy in the weeks that preceded the terrible tragedy, with frequent disputes taking place. Barry stated that her frantic wish was to know why Johnson had been targeted, asking the shooter why she had to attack her like that. All she wanted to know was why.